Hey everybody, this is Brian from Breaking Down Security. Totenkoff and the folks over at the B-Sides Las Vegas Proving Grounds wanted me to play this little ditty for you before our podcast. So hope you enjoy. If you're interested, be sure to get a hold of them, and we'll see you after this.
The 7th annual B-Sides Las Vegas is being held August 4th and 5th at the Tuscany Suites and Casino. B-Sides Las Vegas is where the next big thing happens first, right between the two big security conferences.
Do you have an idea for a talk that would be perfect for B-Sides Las Vegas?
Are you afraid maybe you don't have enough speaker or con experience to actually be able to do it?
Hi, I'm Totenkoff.
And I'm Moe. We're coordinating a program called Proving Ground for B-Sides Las Vegas.
Proving Grounds is designed to create a space for the best new speakers and the hottest talks to be heard. These new presenters are paired with more experienced mentors to help shape their talks and build skills and confidence before the big day.
Exactly. We want to make sure all our speakers hit the jackpot.
I cannot believe you just said that. Dude, we talked about this.
Sorry. The Proving Ground CFP opens February 9th and runs through April 15th. All the details can be found at bsideslv.org. You'll want to get your submission in as soon as possible because slots go fast.
Really? Do I need to get Banshee in here? Our call for mentors also opens on February 9th and General CFP opens in March. So check out the details on Proving Grounds at bsideslv.org. We hope to see you in Las Vegas.
This is Breaking Down Security, episode 6. Welcome back, everybody. It is me and Mr. Betcher.
Hello.
Hey, buddy. We are doing this in the past. Yeah.
I'm confused already.
I know. We had a great time last week with Lee, so much so that we brought him back. Actually, he wouldn't leave, but so we thought we'd pick his brain some more about a recent talk. Actually, a talk he gave at a couple of cons. He in last week's podcast, he talked about Sector and B-Sides Toronto, and talking about how his ISP man in the middle to him. So, welcome back, Lee. We want to talk about how your ISP is being naughty.
Yep, great. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. So maybe give us a quick synopsis of what Sector and is about, because it's not a B-Sides, right? It's a community.
No. Sector is a little more corporate. It's how do I describe it? It's not big like Black Hat and RSA big.
Okay.
But it is along those lines insofar as people from corporations go. It's not just people that are enthusiasts in their own time. It spans a few days. It's at a big convention center. It's catered. It's it's that kind of deal. It's had keynotes from people like Mikko Hyppinen and Charlie Miller and Brian Krebs. So it's got a good lineup of people, but they also try and bring in people talking about the latest things. So they get a lot of people in via the CFP process, which closes relatively close to the conference to make sure they've got up-to-date stuff. And then the content varies. Some of it is technical, there's a tech track, but there's also a management track where people might go and talk about risk management and compliance. Which you wouldn't get at a B-Sides or a DEF CON quite so much. It's sort of focused on those areas as well. But it does have the tech stuff and the pen testing and all that sort of thing.
So corporate, like sponsored by Tim Hortons and no, I'm just kidding.
No.
I love Tim Hortons.
Yeah, InfoSec vendors mainly, but yeah.
Right on. Okay, so how long has it been going on?
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm thinking in my head about 7-8 years, something like that.
That's pretty healthy. Yeah.
I've been to the last 3.
Okay.
And it's been really good. I spoke at the last one and been an attendee at the previous 2. So it's starting to feel like home. It's my local conference, so.
So is it a pretty intimate gig? Is it like 200-300 people, or are we talking like thousands, or?
It's more than 200 or 300. I would hate to guess what the figures actually are, but it runs like 4 or 5 tracks. So
Okay.
plus keynotes in a big hall. So it is pretty well attended. But I don't honestly know what the actual attendance figures are.
No, that's cool. Because when I did B-Side Seattle, we had 150 people, and then of course you hear about Black Hat, which has a Brazilian people,
right?
You know, so I just wanted to kind of gauge the size.
Yeah. It's nowhere. It's not Black Hat size. It's nothing like that. But it's also way bigger than a B-Sides, because B-Sides Toronto is also 150 people. So
oh, really?
I've got a feel for what that is. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so you gave a talk. You gave this talk at the Sector and the B-Sides Toronto. Maybe you could give us some ideas about the content. You said your ISP was basically man in the middling you.
Yeah, so it was pretty easy to spot. My ISP has some messaging they give out to customers, so it's fairly normal messaging. You've hit 75% of your bandwidth quota. Maybe you'd like to buy some more, or you've gone over your bandwidth quota. You're going to see something extra on your bill, and that sort of thing. And the message itself doesn't bother me. The problem was that it was getting injected as a banner at the top of web pages, and it's not even like a captive portal where it bounces you off to some other URL, or the page is completely replaced with the banner. I noticed that the banner was in the web page. It was injected at the top, which caught my eye because that means that they have somehow injected that into the existing HTTP stream that I had with the web server. So that was kind of what set the spidey sense going. I was like, this doesn't feel good. So I went to investigate why, partly because I'm nosy and I just wanted to know why, and partly because I was kind of concerned about what was going on. So most of my talk is really going through the process of how I worked out what they did, as well as what they did, how it works, but also explaining the process of how I derived all the information that I did, because I thought that half the interest wasn't actually necessarily entirely in what my ISP was doing, but partly maybe what the process is for other people that want to analyze networks, because to arrive at the conclusions I did, there was a fair bit of analysis and guesswork and using various tools and things. So I made the talk kind of two halves, the tools and the learning, and then the what were they doing, how were they doing it. And then I end on the why, which is kind of a damp squib in the end, because I was really hoping that this was the tip off that I was under NSA surveillance or something awesome like that, and I wasn't. It was my ISP using stuff to give me messages.
So when you said they were, I've never seen this before because I have Comcast and they're Comcastic. They're awesome. Somewhat. Anyway, so they were injecting. You said they were injecting the code into the web page. So was it JavaScript banner, or was it JavaScript, or was it an iframe or something? How were they injecting it in, or were they taking like the HTML and then just basically shoving it right inside there so it looked like part of the page?
What they actually did was they fake. Getting a little into the technical of how it works. They do not fake DNS or proxy the connection or anything like that. What they actually do is they hijack the TCP connection, and they fake a response from the web server. And when they fake the response from the web server, it is a bunch of JavaScript, and the JavaScript does two things. Firstly, it loads up the banner. They use half the JavaScript just to make sure every last person possible can see it by making it resize itself for tablets, phones, laptops, desktops, whatever, making sure it's all branded right and all that sort of stuff. And then what the script does is allows the session to carry on and then load what should have been the page content underneath the banner, but in the same page on your screen. So they don't show up like an iframe in your page. It looks to the user just like content on the page, although it's actually loaded at two distinct times. behind the scenes.
Okay.
So you said hijack your session.
Yes.
Okay.
So that sounds like a proxy server or something, don't it?
Well, it would. What I actually did, because a proxy, there are different ways you can detect proxies, but what I did was I noticed that when they intercepted stuff, they intercepted it wholesale. So it was all HTTP traffic everywhere. So that meant that I could make sure that they intercepted pages whereby I ran the web server. Therefore, when they're man in the middling me, I have a visualization of the network at the beginning and the end of the transaction. Normally, you only have one.
So hang on. So you made your own you have your own web server so you could see what was happening on that side as well as from the client side.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
nice.
You run packet capture, so TCP dump or whatever your packet capture tool of choice is, and capture the network traffic, and then because you've captured it at the web server and on your desktop client, and they've modified it somewhere in the middle, you can look at that traffic and you can correlate the two data streams against each other and look for differences and similarities and see what came through, what didn't come through, and what came through changed. Certain things can change depending on network setup. For example, if some link in the middle had a low MTU, you could get packet fragmentation. So you can expect a certain level of change, that you might get some fragmented packets that then get reassembled or something like that. Also, if you tap your network in the wrong place, you can cause changes. For example, I used an ether tap that went outside the last Ethernet point in my network to capture the data. Because if I'd captured it on my laptop, it then had to traverse a wireless network, then it would have to go through a NATing device that my ISP provides, and they both mess with packets. By capturing it on the internet side of my router or modem or whatever you use, then you get the packets as they go to the internet. So there's as little modification going to happen as possible, which makes it much easier to spot any changes that someone like an ISP or a carrier has introduced into packets.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to ask about that ether tap. Is that how does that work? Is it a little device, or is it you're splicing off your RJ45 or your RJ11 or whatever?
It is a little device that is near enough splicing off an RJ45. I use the Throwing Star ether tap because it costs about $12. And it's nice and cheap. And it's just a PCB with 4 RJ45 sockets and 2 capacitors on. You can buy it in a kit and solder it up yourself. But you've got an in and an out. So where you would normally have your one Ethernet cable, you put 2 Ethernet cables with it in the middle. So to all intents and purposes, you've got one Ethernet cable. And it's non-detectable on the network because it's a passive device. We're using just voltages and amperages and copper. It's not doing anything active. And then you've got 2 taps coming off, and they're not one for each cable. They're one for outbound traffic and one for inbound traffic, and they duplicate that traffic back out, but they're one way. So if you plug something into them, you can't inject packet onto that cable. It only takes traffic off. And you plug one into each of 2 network interfaces on your device that you're going to use to sniff, so you can run TCP dump twice, capturing once on each interface, and the 2 capture files you get combined make up the overall network. But it's really good because when you use an ether tap, you've got direction. Normally, if you sniff something on your laptop, you have to use the IP addresses or the MAC addresses to understand what direction things are flowing in. But if you're dealing with the potential for spoofed packets, as I was, I don't want to rely on addressing information to determine the direction that things were traveling, coming in and out my network. So by doing it this way, I can look at which dump file they're in. And by knowing which file they're in, I can get direction. So you can be sure that things aren't spoofed or are spoofed. You know where they came from.
Okay.
Which is useful.
I have DSL. There are taps for phone lines too, right? Coming off of a router.
Yeah, there are. I don't know what
modem. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I've not done it on DSL. But you could do what I did with my cable modem, because I do not have a DOCSIS tap because that's expensive. But what I did was I took my the router or modem provided by my ISP and put it into bridging mode. And all that does is takes it off whatever media you're getting it from, cable or DSL or whatever, and just throws it out as raw frames on Ethernet. At that point, of course, you lose your NAT and your public IP address or anything like that, but you just get another router. In fact, these days, most access points and things like that can do it, or your firewall or whatever, and put that back to back, well, via the EtherTap to the bridging device, and let that have your public IP address. So you can just run, an open source firewall or whatever, and use that to do your NATing and be your public IP. And that way, you're getting the raw packet feed into your EtherTap without losing the ability to do all the NATing and everything.
So I have Comcast, like I mentioned before. So I have a surfboard modem that does DOCSIS 3. So all I have to do is basically plug my laptop into my surfboard, and it's a dumb device basically, right? So I should be able to get everything I need to tap my Comcastic internet connection.
Yeah, if it's a dumb device, most of them have bridging mode. And if you put it in bridging mode, put the tap on the back or put your laptop directly on the back, you can get raw data and sniff away.
Okay, because I literally just have a coax cable, and the only thing on the back of it is an Ethernet port and a coax cable. So I don't even know how to put the thing in bridging mode. I don't even think it has one.
Right, okay. I mean, you can do it without the bridging mode. It's just that NAT can do things to packet. Well, it does do things by definition because it's changing the IP address. And occasionally that means that it can mess with stuff like MTUs and maybe sequence numbers and port numbers and things. So it really depends what you're looking for as to whether it's going to potentially mask some stuff, or if not mask it, make it a little more difficult, because you're going to see a lot more differences than you would with a raw feed. But it's not impossible by any means. I think what I saw in this instance would actually still show up.
So they were putting this banner that told you to, hey, buy more, or pay us more money because you're using up a lot of data here. Yeah. What was wrong with that?
The message I'm fine with. It's the fact that they have injected something into a web page directly. I probably would have been a little annoyed if they'd bounced me to a completely different page of their own, by mangling DNS or something. But the fact that it loaded within that page meant that they had been intercepting my traffic, which I believe is against the telecoms compliance rules in Canada, amongst other things. But that small issue aside, it also led me to wonder, if they have a device doing this, what else could someone inject? I mean, if I'm to trust them that they should be injecting this, they're already putting JavaScript in. If you look at what you hear in the news when oppressive regimes, for want of a better word, decide to drop malware on activists so they can spy on them, that's often done by a fake Flash update, or by dumping malicious JavaScript into a web page, or whatever else. If they're injecting it, I'm sure they've got visibility too, so they could be taking cookies that you could use to hijack HTTP sessions. There's a lot of different things that could be done, and my concerns were, okay, if someone were to get hold of this, not necessarily my ISP, say a rogue member of staff, or even someone hacks them, and it's someone external, and they decide that instead of putting banners, they want on all however many million subscribers to drop not even 0 day, just, a fairly recent-ish Flash exploit or Java exploit or something, the number of devices that they could compromise via that is potentially very large. And then throw into their, what data they can potentially be collecting from you in the process. And the recovery from that can be very hard, because you've got a large number of subscribers, and these days, you don't have the family PC and that's it. I mean, if I look in my house, if I look at the number of phones, tablets, laptops, desktops, video streaming devices, whatever, you've got quite a wide number of devices that you could compromise from injecting a single customer. Now span that across an entire province or country, and that's a lot of people potentially compromised.
Yeah, plus you do all your work out of your house, so
Right.
you
Yeah,
could be
exactly.
compromised, and any clients you have could be compromised as well if that data was taken from you.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's definitely a concern area for me.
So you said that falls afoul of some legislation in Canada. Is that the PIPEDA that you mentioned in your talk?
No, that's another bit that I mentioned. PIPEDA is actually not about the telecoms. That's about personal information. So that's about if someone holds personal information on you, you can say, I want to see what information you hold on me. Mm-hmm. It's a regulation in Canada that if someone holds records about you, and it may be sort of semi-public information, your address, your phone number, whatever, or more private things, healthcare or whatever, that you can say, I know you have information on me. What information do you have? And they have to come forward and tell you within X number of days what they hold on you.
So like in the U.S., that's similar to like a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah. No, the one I was talking about was, I think it's Telecommunications Act by the CRTC, which is the regulatory body for telecoms. And I have spoken to them about it, and the legislation is a little out of date because telecommunications refers to things like telephone and television, and it's written as such. So it is difficult to work out where it does and does not apply to internet and digital-based communications. So my argument was, you say you cannot tamper with a message. And if you're altering packets, to me, that is tampering with the message. Because to my mind, on an internet connection, the packets you send and receive are the message.
Sure.
Now, the feedback I got from the first person that looked at this was that, no, they're not tampering with the message because the web page that you tried to visit appears below. Therefore, you have received the message that was sent to you. So that is now a little bit of a matter of debate as to what constitutes the message because of this legislation being so old.
You received a web page and more. So
yes,
you should be grateful. You should be grateful.
I think it worked when it was TV because it was to stop people doing things like pulling the ads off and throwing their own ads in. And it's very clear that the message has changed. But I think with this modified sort of perception of what the message could be, it's getting difficult to debate at the minute.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So I noticed on your blog, Square Lemon, that you received a letter on December 22nd saying, yeah, we don't track your data.
Right.
Has that gone any further?
Yeah. I wrote back to them a couple of times to say that not in a threatening way, but to say that I filed this PIPEDA request and you've come back to me and you've said that you don't collect any data, and thank you very much, but you're wrong. Because we haven't touched on it yet, but part of what happened that I demonstrated in the talk was that in order to do this, using the method they do, they collect my browsing history and they retain it for 30 days. So I was expecting to see that. So I contacted them back and said, look, I'm not being sort of scaremongery. I've read something in the paper about, oh no, the ISPs, they are scary. I actually have some concrete data that shows that you are retaining that, and I'm sure it was an honest mistake, and I'm not accusing you of anything, but would you mind looking at this again in light of me knowing that you have this data? And they wrote back to me again and went, no, we don't do anything. So I wrote back again, this time CC'd a few more people. And I have had a reply that they are looking into it, though they still don't quite believe that they do it. But we will see. Maybe it'll go a little further.
Now, can you walk through how you know that is a fact?
Sure. So the first thing to understand is that because There's the URL at the top remains unchanged, so you're not bounced to some other service. And the web page under it loads. So they haven't completely hijacked the connection and just forced the entire TCP connection to their server. It gets the injection and then can carry on and load the page. So when I was doing the packet dumps, I was able to observe a whole bunch of things. And one of the things was they only ever inject injectable pages, that being HTML pages. Because, of course, web pages are constituted of a large number of components. There's CSS and there's images and there's audio and whatever. And they never hijack any of that stuff. Similarly, applications that do things like talk XML back, like if you've got, I don't know, all the various social media apps and that sort of thing, none of them ever got tapped. It's only ever the raw text HTML pages that did, which means that they understand, they have a concept of pages that they can and cannot inject things into. Because if they injected into images, halfway through loading a page, images would break, that sort of thing, because you wouldn't be getting JPEGs anymore. So they understand, they have a concept of pages that can and can't be injected. But it doesn't just end there, because I started looking at the pages that they do and do not inject, and I was able to demonstrate that they index the pages in advance and they have advanced knowledge. The decision to inject or not inject the page is not made halfway through you loading it, because their interception technique actually kicks in before the web servers had time to respond, which means that they don't get a chance to see the MIME type in the HTTP header. So they don't know real time if you're getting HTTP back. And if they don't know real time, that means they know in advance. So what I did was I set up a little bit of a trap's probably a cruel word, but we'll go with trap. I set up a website, and I set it up to have a redirect on the web server so that I had an infinite number of URLs I could give that web page. And sorry, I skipped a step, and I skipped it on the talk too. I noticed that when they intercept pages I've been to a lot, the banner just straight in, first try. You know, you go to, you know, some vendor you go to, or a comic you read every day, and it's straight in there. Pages I'd never been to before, they didn't. They got injected on the second try, which made me think that what happened was they profiled the page on the first try, understood whether they could or could not inject it, and then actually went through with the injection on the second try, which led to the sort of the logical assumption that the pages I went to a lot had previously been profiled at some point, so they were ready to inject first try. So I set up this page with the infinite number of URLs, and I just kept going to it. Like every few hours, went to it with a new URL, and I went to it one time only. And then I waited till I hit my bandwidth allowance, so they were putting the banners in. And then I went to all the pages again, and I observed which ones took one try, and because they were already profiled, and which ones took two tries. And then, because I've been keeping a note of when I went to all the different versions of the URL, I could track that back to a time. And that worked out to be exactly 30 days, which seemed too much of a round number to be a coincidence on that. Yeah. And I actually repeated the test again. I did it twice with the host set up with no DNS, and it was HT accessed, so you could only get to it from my house. So they can't have used a web crawler or something like that to detect it. It had to be picked up off the wire, because really it's my laptop is the only host that has any chance of hitting that website, and yet it still happened.
Okay, so they're not scraping it remotely like using curl or something like that. They're pulling it as you're pulling it down, and then saving it somewhere and modifying it.
Yeah, exactly. And as secondary evidence to that, of course, it's my web server, so I can hit the HTTP logs, and I am the only person that hit that site. So that's that. And then the further observation was I modified that page ever so slightly. I made the mistake of starting it like you would in the 90s with just the straight open bracket HTML instead of the doc type at the top.
I still do it that way. So
and they didn't inject the one with just HTML at the top, which says to me that they're not just looking at HTTP headers, they're actually doing some kind of content inspection on the payload coming back too. So if you consider that it's 30-day retention on, at the very least, the URL and the MIME type, but it looks like a certain amount of document content, not saying they're indexing the whole thing, but something, that's quite a lot of data. And one of the points I make on it is I bring up this EFF slide that they put out when Verizon did the telephone metadata collection. And it's about demonstrating how much data you can derive without ever having the content. And actually, it's very much the same. Just by URLs, I mean, there are certain URLs you could look at and you know that they are, they're people downloading wares or looking at porn or doing whatever other thing that they probably don't want other people knowing about. Mm-hmm. Not to mention there could be secret stuff in there. You only need some badly designed app that doesn't use HTTP and includes something bad in the URL and gives away things. And if they're looking at headers, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff outside of the URL too. You've got things like my language, the browser I'm using, the OS I'm using. They're not private things, but if someone's looking to attack you, they're all useful bits of information that someone could use to paint a picture of you. And like was shown with the Verizon metadata situation, there's an awful lot of information you can get without content. If by way of an example, if you were to see the URLs of someone looking at say a website about a particular terminal disease, and then looking at the website for support groups for that terminal disease, and then looking at their healthcare insurance provider, you don't need an awful lot of content to guess what the potential reasons might be behind that browsing history. And you tie that together with, a month's worth of browsing history, you can probably piece together an awful lot on a person, not to mention a whole household.
Yeah, the cookies that Verizon down here in the States have in the their mobile cookies or whatever. Yeah, they said, oh no, we made it harder so that people can't track those things, and you've got people telling them, well, no, people can still use these and track these, and you may have great, that's work. So you get all kinds of issues. Let me mute that because I'm just off the record here now. So metadata is it's just like you mentioned with the example there. The the one I saw the EFF slide. I still have it quite a bit. They're like you call a suicide prevention hotline for 38 minutes, but we don't need to know what the phone call was about.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So having those having that kind of information, even if it's a metadata kind of thing, is bad because it can profile people over time. I saw an article today about that people can profile you just by 3 or 4 credit card purchases.
Really?
I can believe. Yeah. So one question I had about where it's injecting it, is it always in the same place on a page? And does it happen on HTTPS stuff?
It's always the same place on a page. It's they don't inject inside page content loaded within a page. It's on the root of a page. I mean, it can be anywhere on a website, any page on the site, but it's on the main page. It does not affect HTTPS because the way they inject it, they would actually break the crypto, and browsers would complain and get upset horribly. I noted that they didn't try to. As far as I can tell, they actually have a separate network for doing this, because if you TCP traceroute on port 80 versus any other port, you can see that it takes 2 completely different routes through the network, and it's not a weird routing anomaly. This happened. I tested it for weeks on end, and it's consistently the same 2 routes all the time. My guess is that they built a separate network so that the devices they use do not have to deal with huge or as huge a volume of traffic. thus meaning they can use them across more customers simultaneously. So it's cost saving in that sense.
Okay.
Because coincidentally,
so they're
sorry.
Oh, you said that they're just rerouting port 80 and everything else goes the normal route.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, port 80 takes a couple of extra hops. When I started looking at it, it appears that the injected packets originate from this alternate network as well. So it all seems to fit with this one is a little less concrete and a bit more my theory, but it seems to fit with the that they have a separate interception network that this stuff passes through, and it's used for monitoring and injecting the packets that go through. And I'm assuming, and it is completely just assuming that that's for the to manage the amount of traffic they have to deal with.
Right. Now, one thing I saw your talk, and one thing striking to me was the patent. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So part of my information gathering was when I worked out what vendor they were using to do this. I was reading their website and I noticed that the system they use to do it does not have an awful lot of documentation, because I was looking to get the tech specs or the deployment documentation or something like that so I could work out what was happening, and none of it's available. And then I started reading and it had the keywords "our patented system" right there on the marketing page. I was like, wow, this is great, because because it seems to stem from a lot of companies in the US, other places too, but I notice it particularly in the US, patent everything because everyone, likes to patent troll each other or counter sue each other or whatever else goes on for patent infringement. So everyone patents stuff to cover themselves, make sure they're sorted. Of course, patents are public knowledge. They're not a secret document as far as I'm aware. So if people start patenting things, all you have to do is look up the patents that companies have filed and you can guess what they're doing. Now, Google has a patent search engine, which I didn't realize, but it's just like the normal Google, but for all the patent documents. Nice. So you can search for specific patent numbers, but you can search for specific companies too. So I went and looked up the vendor and started looking at their patents. And sure enough, after I'd done all this research and worked it out, there is a patent for injecting pages into consumer cable connections, and it actually details the equipment and where it goes and approximately the technique used. It also detailed some other patents which I hadn't observed happening, but they were sort of troubling to me, because one of them involved assessing web pages as they go past to see if there's any advertising space where they could rip out the existing ads and put their own in. Was
yeah, I saw that. It was a decision tree, right? Is
exactly.
there an advertisement? Yes. Inject new advertisement.
Yeah, the best thing was, if there's an advert in there, no, leave it alone. Only if there's existing advertising do we want to go ripping into. Yeah. I mean, now I can't say that they're doing this and they haven't just filed a patent, but if you go and look at their product portfolio, it is nearly all involved with manipulating or injecting into web pages. And some of them are for good reasons. I'm not saying they're not all good reasons, because one of them is, for example, for putting Amber Alerts. But they actually use the same system to do the Amber Alerts that they use to do the injection that I saw on my connection. So once again, that falls into and you can dump dodgy exploits in with JavaScript or whatever else. So there's nice, well-meaning motivations or reasons behind it, but I'm not convinced that it's a safe or sensible thing to be doing.
Now, this other network, right,
yes.
that it goes and bypasses, that's not on the internet, right? That's completely private. Nobody can access it except like two-factor auth and all that.
You would hope. No. The IP addresses I saw going over this network were all public addressable IP addresses. No. And in the case of not my ISP specifically, but a number of others, there is a specific pattern you can search for to look on Shodan for this, and I found 40-something nodes on the internet. And I'm not talking about the network, I'm talking the management nodes for this specific vendor's injection tool. So 40 nodes is quite a lot. I think it was 20 management nodes and 20 injection nodes, which probably gives you 20 instances of it. But when you consider, like you said, this isn't just a case of making it private and securing it. I found it on Shodan. If it's on Shodan, then that's open to the world territory. That is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it has a password. I haven't connected to the thing. I'm sure there's a password or something. But really, equipment like this should be only connecting from, the engineering LAN within the ISP. On private management network address space, not publicly addressed browser straight through it, because for Shodan to have grabbed the title banner from it, that means it's managed to make an HTTP connection and grab the title, if nothing else.
You've got a crappy ISP. I'm glad there are no other ISPs using this.
Yeah. Yours may have featured on.
Oh God!
Yeah.
God!
Yeah. No.
So it's not just on your ISP. Other ISPs are using this technology as well.
Yeah. There's more than one vendor, but this vendor alone I saw on a bunch. I saw it on 3 of the big ones in Canada. I saw it on a few in the US. Comcast may have been one of them. The only caveat I would put is, of course, I'm not connected to these devices, so I can't tell it's not in some development lab somewhere that's been exposed to the internet. I can't prove they're in production, but they do have them. And the vendor's website may have a mock-up they did for Comcast on it too.
Betcher, they're headquartered in San Antonio. Go down there and throw some eggs at their building. Appreciate that much. So, all right. So I want to go back to the talk where you were analyzing the PCAPs. You had mentioned about several tools that you had actually used to analyze your PCAPs. You said you just didn't want to throw a 40 gig TC or PCAP into Wireshark because it tends to get all explodey.
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk about some of the tools you used when you were analyzing your PCAPs?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're all variations on a theme, I guess. I already mentioned earlier about the EtherTap creates 2 dump files, and a lot of tools like to read 1 dump file because it lets them do the flow from client to server. They don't want to analyze 1 for the client to server and 1 for the server to client connection. So you've got these merging tools. I think it's called MergeCap. I should probably have had my own presentation open on the screen. That would have helped. What you can do is use it to merge 1 or more PCAP files together into 1 PCAP to make it easier to look at.
So how does it do it? Does it do it by timestamp, or does it do it by TCP number, or?
It does it by time, but not your file time. When you take a PCAP, it's near enough a raw dump of the packets, but each packet gets a little header prepended to it, and that includes a timestamp. So assuming your clocks are all synced on all your devices, you can merge them together and they all magically munge up into 1 nicely time-synced file. Which, of course, if you're capturing it all on 1 device, your clock is synced. It's only if you're using 2 separate devices to capture in and out, in which case you're in a world of other issues. But yeah, you can use the merge cap, and that will take, I think it takes any one of a huge number, and you can merge them together. And then you use other ones to break them apart again, because once you've got that huge file, you do not want to load that into Wireshark unless things have changed. Last time I used it to do anything big, it decided that loading the PCAP into RAM was the best possible plan, which, that's great. When you're capturing a few seconds and doing some analysis, it makes it faster. When you've left this running for a month, no, it doesn't work quite as well. So
you let it run for a whole month.
Yeah.
So the files are rather large then.
Yeah, I mean, it's about as much as data as you transfer. Like when you transfer data, there's a small overhead for TCP and then another small overhead for IP. Well, it's the same again. There's another small overhead for the PCAP format, but it's there or thereabouts. It's the order of magnitude of the data that you transmit and receive. So you can, but your disks only need to go as fast. In fact, not even as fast as your data is transferring, because you've got some RAM buffers and stuff like that. So you can buy a cheapo disk from, whatever your local electrical retailer is, and get a couple of terabyte external USB drive, and you're good. So So yeah, you take the files and then I use different things to break them up. So there's things like TCP trace, TCP splice, are two of them where you can use it to break it out into individual sessions or individual periods of time. So what I would do is, I was lucky that the injection I was seeing and researching at the time was so obvious that my time frames were entire days of not injected and being injected. So I could just pick out chunks from the time and then use the TCP splicing tools to pull out some sessions, and then the data is small enough to be able to handle in any one of a number of tools. So you've got a few. Wireshark's the obvious one because it's looking at the packets raw, but it also has such great functionality in terms of being able to look at protocols. It will immediately flag up, oh, this is an HTTP GET request. Oh, this is the response. Oh, this is a fragmented packet, and this is a duplicate packet, and all that sort of stuff. But you sometimes want some other stuff. There's a tool called pcap-diff, and there's lots of different ones called pcap-diff, diff-pcap, pcap-diff underscore, and whatever. They're all variations on the theme that you can give them two different dumps, and it'll do comparison and throw out the differences to you, which is how I did the server to client comparison stuff. And then there's a bunch of other tools for analyzing the pcap, the client-only pcaps that you get. So I actually use Snort because although I'm not doing IDS detection on it, because Snort's an IDS, it lets you write rules. So instead of having to, for want of a better word, grep the packets for one thing, then search for something else, and search for something else, I just made a massive rule set in Snort that were all my different searches ran it once, and it just spits out, a report for you based on that input. But you can also run it through things like NTOP is quite useful, which is actually not a security tool at all. It's just used for auditing network connections. Normally people use it live as a packet sniffer because it does things like top talkers on the network and top protocol on a network and the number one outbound connection you make and all that sort of stuff. But when you're analyzing this, being able to throw a PCAP at that and have it go through and tell you where you're talking to allows you to hone in quite quickly on this sort of stuff.
So if I were to be so fortunate as to get a copy of your Snort rules, could I just run it on my laptop and then determine from those if it captured anything that was being injected?
Yeah, funny you should mention that. I haven't published the rules I was using when I was doing the research because there were some that are useless and very noisy, but I've published 3 or 4 rules that are their own little rule file. They're linked on my blog and they're in GitHub that pick up this particular vendor. That's not to say I would say run these and you will know instantly if you're being man in the middle. It doesn't pick up all classifications, but it picks up the particular technique that I had.
Okay.
One is semi-kludgy. One picks up the vendor's string that it puts in the HTTP headers because they put their own name in the HTTP headers in the server string. So that one's a pretty easy one. The one picks up on some TCP flags that they set during the injection process to make it easier to inject packets. And that one seems to have worked with 100% accuracy as far as I can work out so far. And there's another one that's kind of the reverse that doesn't tell you if you've been injected, but you can run it on your web server to see if someone connecting to you just got injected. There is a 4th one I did, but it's noisy because it does have some false positives. One thing I noticed was when they're injecting, they try to keep the size of the data down so that they can fit it in one packet. It makes session management easier at their end. And one of the things they did was to drop the server string out of the HTTP response. But also, because of the way the system worked, they have to include all the pragma no cache stuff. Because if you cache the banner, you can never load the real web page afterwards. So I wrote a rule that looks for the lack of the server string, but the inclusion of all the no caching stuff in the HTTP headers. Unfortunately, there are a couple of other places that use that. So a lot of DSL modems use it on their web interfaces for some reason.
Really?
And somewhat unfortunately, Akamai. So in some instances, and certain parts of Amazon. So it's a bit noisy, but if you don't mind noise and you're doing some research, that one's worth running. But the other ones are not noisy at all. I haven't had any false positives from those. And in fact, I would welcome feedback if anyone wants to run them on their local Snort instances and let me know, either if they're getting injected or if they get false positives. That would be great, because I wouldn't mind expanding this to be a bit more comprehensive in detecting man in the middle beyond just this one vendor's technique.
Cool. So do you use these PCAP manipulation tools on a regular basis at your job, or is this something that you just do research on regularly?
This particular one was just a me thing in the evening. I've always done it because I actually find TCP dumps quite a good way of debugging when I have problems, or at least clear text protocols being able to debug, or network problems where you don't need to see the protocol, you just need to see if you're getting responses and things. But also it's useful for reverse engineering. If you have to reverse engineer network-based products, sniffing data or doing man in the middle yourself is actually quite a good way of being able to mess with stuff, because you don't have to get down into the depths of editing binaries. Like if I wanted to mess around with how an application talks and it uses a clear text protocol like HTTP, man in the middling it or sniffing the connection to see how the protocol works is much easier than trying to disassemble the binary and start messing with that sort of thing. It's a quick and dirty route, but it's actually pretty good at getting quick results, I find.
Cool. All right. So these are all command line based tools. You have to have some knowledge of command line and not be afraid of it to use them.
Yeah, the only one that's really graphical is Wireshark, and I think Microsoft has their own sniffer, but now too. But I find to get the real benefit, the command line tools work out better. Even with Wireshark, it has a text version called T-Shark.
T-Shark, yeah.
And I find that I can write better rules with T-Shark, because you can write rules not just in what data it's pulling, but how it displays it, which of course in the graphical one you don't. You can pick the columns it does or doesn't have, but in T-Shark you have the equivalent of sort of awk and cut and that kind of thing, so you can output it in the way you want, and in fact then you can start piping it to shell commands and all that sort of thing, and you can go off sysadmin style with 1,000 greps chained together to find everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I think command line is definitely a thing to have, and that's not to belittle people wanting to do this on Windows or anything. In fact, the command line tools are available on Windows. I just find that doing it on a Unix-based system lends itself a lot more easily to doing this stuff without having to start putting a ton of tools on, because TCP dump is on, I think it's on most of the BSDs and Linuxes. It's on OS X. Yeah. So are the shell tools. Wireshark's in nearly all their package management systems, as are most of the other PCAP-based tools. It doesn't take you very long at all to get up and running, so long as you're willing to put in a bit of typing, I think.
Yeah, you've got to install drivers for Windows and stuff like WinPCAP, and you've got to have the PCAP drivers to allow for raw downloads of network traffic on Windows. So yeah, Linux is a lower barrier to entry.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So what are your takeaways from everything you've found? I mean, is there any advice for users of the internet?
Yeah, how do we defend against this? Is there a way to defend against this?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it earlier. They don't touch HTTPS. One of the points of crypto that people often miss is that it's not just about privacy. It's actually about ensuring the integrity of the data. So if people start messing with the data, that also breaks crypto. It's not just your privacy. The prime example being a cryptographic signature on a plain text email. If you alter that email, the crypto was never giving you privacy, but the signature breaks. So what I'm coming to is, if you use crypto, then the chances are much lower. They either need to find a gap in your crypto, or they need to be doing things like have rogue certificates issued to them. So in this instance, using cryptographic tools will bypass it every time. And someone asked me at the talk, that means I can just VPN somewhere, doesn't it? Because VPN uses crypto. And point I said to them, that I made to them in that instance was, well, yes, that would bypass this one, but there's nothing to say your VPN provider isn't running a tool like this. VPN is not end-to-end crypto. It would bypass your ISP's crypto for sure, but it doesn't guarantee it. Something like HTTPS is end-to-end, or at least end to load balancer or whatever, but it gets you past all the intermediary networks in the middle to the host at the end that you presumably trust. And that's really the main way to defend this stuff, because although I managed to write a way to be able to detect this particular instance, there are other vendors out there, and there's nothing to say that one of theirs might not be able to, might not trigger my rules or might be able to do something else. And crypto's really the only way I can think of to do this from a technical standpoint. The other one, of course, is the standard, if you feel strongly about it, speak to people about legislation, speak to your ISP about do they do this sort of stuff, although they may write to you and claim they don't, obviously. And maybe attack it from that point of view. But yeah, crypto's the main technical defense, I think, and vigilance in general. It's kind of difficult right now because, of course, HTTPS, it's all well and good me saying use crypto, but that means that the web server has to run HTTPS, and we're just not at the place where everyone does yet.
Mine runs the finest SSL version 3 that money can buy. So I'm even using RC4 ciphers to make it even that much more secure. Yep. Yeah. So, wow, that was awesome and scary at the same time. This is another one of them Phil Coggin type talks where I'm like, well, I'm going to have to stay awake because I don't know what my ISP is doing right now. They're probably listening in. I'm about to lose my internet connection. So, yeah. So, Mr. Betcher, do you have any other questions for Lee?
Is Skype secure? Because I think we're using Skype right now.
No, bro. Come on now. China had them owned before they were bought by Microsoft. Now Microsoft's got them owned. So
yeah, I was going to say, didn't that feature in something from Mr. Snowden? Didn't Skype get a mention?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, big Fast Eddie told us all about that. So
no, I guess that's a wrap, huh?
Yeah. Wow. Lee, it's been great talking to you.
You too. Thank you.
Yeah, you're always welcome to come back on if you're going to do any talks. If you want to come on before the talk or after the talk, you can come on whenever you want and talk about whatever you want. If you want to come on and rant, we love a good rant.
Okay, cool. I'll do that.
Yeah. For sure. So, you're at you work for Leviathan Security here in Seattle, local joint, leviathansecurity.com. Your Twitter handle is Synac PSE, kind of a mixture between Syn and AC and Synapse. Yep. Your blog is blog.squarelemon. I was going to make a joke about it calling squirreleman.com, but I still see Squirrel Eman or whatever. Anyway.
I'm going to go register that now anyway.
There you go. Squirrel Eman. Yeah. Okay. And of course, you've got your blog, your Twitter, you're on LinkedIn. I guess we should mention our Twitters. Yours is @BetcherPone to Mr. Betcher, and mine is @BrianBreak. I have a Facebook page, facebook.com/breakingdownsec, I think. You can give us an email at bds.podcast. If you want to get a hold of, if you want to mention something to Lee, please feel free to email us and we'll pass it on to him. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Breaking Down Security. Episode 6 is in the can. Everyone have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.